Hey. Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play, and I'm back with the lovely group, Julia D. Caneva and Lauren Yee. Can you both introduce yourself?
That's me. I'm Julia. I work as an intentional living coach, and I'm just an all-around, have an insatiable curiosity, especially for human behavior. So this kind of thing is my jam.
I did want to allow Julia to go first since her name came first. I'm Lauren Yee. I am a cultivator of curiosity and facilitator of community. And so this is my group of finding out stuff because that's what I love. So I'm here for it.
And Lauren, you brought up what we want to start exploring, and we'll see where this takes us. But what do we start?
So we've in our death chats, which seems like maybe a scary title, but it's not so scary. It's just a thing that happens. But in our death chats before, we've talked a lot about like what that looks like for us or how we've experienced it in our circles. But something that we haven't really gotten to touch on very much is like once that change happens for someone in your life, what happens after that, and like the mourning process or the traditions that surround it for yourself or culturally or whatever. And that can look like a lot of different things to a lot of different people. With that, it's a lot. And I'm not sure if that has sparked anything specific for anyone for a place to kind of start, or if we almost want to just say, like, if it was like, if you had to describe like mourning as a feeling, maybe we could start there. I mean, it's like, what do you feel, or what does it feel like, or like, what kind of picture does it paint? Like, if it was, I feel like I've done this with Jeff before, but in like about good, happy feelings. But like, if you're talking about mourning, like, what does that feel like, or what colors is it, or that kind of thing? What's the feel?
I mean, what comes up for me when you ask that is, since I'm cerebral, I'll get to the colors in a minute. Just the idea of mourning as kind of like a state of being, in a sense, so that it sort of encompasses all of the things. And to me, it feels like a period of reflection. And in that, I think if I think about periods of mourning in my life, I think a lot of, to me, it's like green, blue, and purple. And it's like all of the things in terms of emotions. Like because there's so much stillness, then like the happy memories and the sad memories and the sadness about not having more happy memories, and like just layers of all the things. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of resonate with the blue. Like I envision as like dark blue, yeah, and very, yeah, just very dark. And it reminds me of, I forgot which Harry Potter movie, but the Harry Potter movie where you could only see the skeleton horses if you had experienced death, you'd seen death. And I think of that where like there's certain people that understand it and then other people that just don't. And what's ironic is my mom just came by to drop off apple strudel, not for me, but for my girlfriend and her kids. And she had just come from a funeral, you know? She had just come from a funeral of one of her classmates that was, you know, my mom's like 1947, so 73. And, you know, her classmates are like 78, 77, you know? And it, you know, as she was dropping it off, because we couldn't hug it, like, you know, I could tell there was a certain like sadness and a certain like loneliness and a certain like looking for connection, that because she was just coming from a place where she was, I think it was the wake, where she couldn't connect with them, even though she was there, you know, where it's such a weird time where even, at least what's happening in Illinois is they're discouraging people to go to funerals and wakes because you shouldn't be in groups. And how is she going to say goodbye to her classmate, as well as also think about her own mortality, right? And, you know, kind of tying into this, I forgot who I said this to. I must have sent this in an article, but there's something called, I forgot what the website, I'll look it up, but it's something like seeyourparents.com. And you can go on the website and you can type in how many more holidays you think you have with them. And it adds up how many more times you're going to see them. I know.
That sounds stressful.
I know. And
Like,
then
gets you.
imagine, like, what number is a good number? If it's 80, is that a lot? If it's 20, is that too little? Like, gosh, like just, but logic would tell you that if you ran those numbers, like, so yeah, I'm feeling all those layers of emotions.
I think that's really true for me too, because it's it's one of those like Anchorman like glass case of emotion moments in life where you're just like, I don't know what to feel because everything that I've known has changed. And so you're like, do I feel happy or sad? Do I feel bad that I feel happy for a second? It's just like a very confusing time. And I to talk about color, I feel like the times that I've had experienced this in my life, whether it was for somebody like a family friend or a direct family member, like depending on how close you are in your circles of how well you know them, it's still been kind of the same for me of like, I really love colors in general. Like I have a set of cookbooks over there that's organized in rainbow color. So like, I feel like when there's these moments, it's almost like a weird, because it's a lot of things happening at once, it's like like a pause almost. So it's almost like, not necessarily, I get the thing about darkness too, but for me, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but it's like earth tone, neutral, gray, like it could be colors in it, but it's like, it's almost like a gloomy day where everything's like a little bit muted, where I'm just like, what's going on? And it's just like, I need to like understand my world, which feels almost aggressive, but that's what's happening. And I want to say there's, even as a person who's experienced, I had my mom pass away, and 10 years later, my dad pass away. And that was even several years ago at this point. And so even, I mean, I was at different points in my life, I guess, too, but like how I experienced it when that happened for me and my mom versus me and my dad, being able to like understand what that looked like was like, I think that there was a part of me that was just like, nope, this isn't real. And I just like didn't refuse to accept it, but like didn't know how to process it. So I was like, okay, I just keep doing things. But then like I was older the next time that happened with my dad. And so it's like, okay, I've had this experience before. I want to be like not in it, but like, okay, I know kind of what to expect, or like maybe things that I should think of. I don't even want to say should, but just like I had, unfortunately, some familiarity, but I like could understand that it was like okay to have all of these feelings at once. Yeah. Kind of to shift momentarily, because Jeff, something that you said made me think of randomly another conversation I had with a group of friends. And it can kind of be like, how do you mourn or commemorate or celebrate people who have passed, sort of a thing, is like what you had said about your mom. We were talking just because 2020 is a weird year, so like a lot of things are happening and everything bad feels like extra bad. And it feels like there's hiccups along the way, but there's like two main times where like death feels everywhere. And I feel like for me, one of them, like the way that we were talking about it was like, one is for me now, it's like when all of your like childhood people you looked up to, like the actors and the actresses and the people on the game shows and the sports icons and like musicians, and like once they get old enough that they're all like starting to pass away and you're like, oh my God, my childhood. And then once you get past that, there's like some number of years, and then the sort of expected time when it's like, then your friends and classmates and like people, and they start to pass away. And I don't really know what to make of that, but I feel like those are also different things, because how you mourn or celebrate or commemorate people who you know versus who you look up to can be super different. And it's weird because we don't always they can mean a lot to us, but we don't, it like hits us so much harder, or like we're okay doing more of like a happy, oh, this person's life was so great, musician, actor who I don't really know, but I like idolized. And then when it's like your own person, you're like, I can only think of the bad stuff.
Totally. Just like gonna give it a minute.
No, I'm sorry. I say a lot of things.
No, it was
sometimes.
beautiful. It was wonderful.
I mean, because we've talked about Chadwick Boseman, right? And also just even things like Alex Trebek passed away recently. I was like, oh, I love Jeopardy.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's all I knew about him, really.
Yeah.
But it's like a core part of my like existence.
Yeah. Well, there's like familiarity and again, like just memories and, you know, having that moment that's like, my reality is different. Is that like the puncture point kind of? And I feel like that's mourning, is like that space around that point.
That feels so like that feel like how I was like, well, what's it feel like? Because it can be different. And when you said puncture point, it's like, ooh, yeah, there's like a puncture point, and then you like kind of deflate a little bit, and like not completely, but you're just like,
Yeah.
And then like it's how coming around out of that. And it's okay to feel that, but then how do you? What are different ways that you know that you have, or like maybe know other people have? I don't know how to even phrase it, like not come out of it, but like practiced and lived with and annually celebrated people.
What's interesting in the Philippines, and I think they do this in a lot of Central America and maybe even other parts of the world, is, you know, like in the Philippines, they have picnics at the funeral. You know, not at the funeral. They have a funeral, but then the following year, they'll have a picnic right in the cemetery, and multiple. And sometimes they'll do it multiple days, and lots of people are hanging out. And it kind of reminds me of, is it Coco? Is that the movie about death?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you know, where it's all about making sure you don't forget about the person. You know, and this kind of ties in with the whole idea of what I think of mourning. And I think of like, well, what's the right way to mourn? I think a lot of times we're supposed to, that's where we flee to. Like, I don't know if I mourned my dad correctly. I don't even know if I mourned my dad. I don't know if I actually have. He passed away 5 years ago. You know, we're going to celebrate his birthday on the 20th, and he passed away on November 15th. And I remember like sitting with my sister just like 2 days ago, and we were talking about this. And my mom and I brought up that, yeah, he passed away on the 15th. And my sister was like, well, I don't want to celebrate that. I don't want to celebrate the day he died. You know, like she was angry about it. And for her, like, I'm not celebrating that day. That day is not significant to me. Well, I feel like it is, you know, for at least for me, that was a day that he transitioned, right? And then there's also the day in which he was born 5 days later. So, you know, I don't know if I'm doing it right. I was at a cemetery, like I think a week or a week and a half ago. I just went on a whim, and I'm just standing there and I'm like talking to marble. Like, is that correct? Like, is he there? I don't know. Are you there? Or am I just talking to a marble stone? Like, I don't know. Like, who knows?
I had similar feelings of just like, I think that I recognized or realized that, I mean, I know that there's not like a right way or wrong way. There's probably a assumed right way because of movies and TV and what you're told and like what you see. But there's not a right way to feel things. But I had like your juxtaposition between you and your sister of like celebrate that. I do. And I don't think that I didn't have like such a declaration, but it's kind of like the date of birth and or death, and if people attach significance to that at a later time. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's hard because it's like, what else is happening? So I dissociated, not fully, but a little bit with both. I think part of it for me was I have a sister, she's younger than me. And there was our parents, and my parents and I all had our birthdays in April, like very close together. So that's also like I can't too many feelings, and like, not like I don't know, I like recognize, and I like usually I'm like, oh, it's my mom's birthday, but I don't like outwardly do anything about it. And similarly, like with the date of passing, I feel like they're just like, I don't want to ignore them, but it's also like, depending on the closeness to the individual and how it all went down, that could be super traumatic. And I'm also like, ooh, yeah, like I don't really want to remember that specifically. And so like, I don't feel like I like have a scheduled, like, this is when I want to celebrate. It's kind of a little more when it happens for me. But my partner, he had a half brother who passed away, and his family, they celebrate on his birthday and on the day of passing, like not necessarily in like a big way, but just like, oh, we're all gonna have dinner together. And you're like, okay, this is new to me, I didn't know that people did this. And like, to each their own, it's just like weird and confusing to me from my experience. And so I'm so interested to see about other people as well. Really, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, so in my family, there's 3 sisters and my parents, and all of my grandparents have passed except for my dad's mom. She's still going strong. Her birthday's next week, actually. She will be 95. And in that space, as I think about, like, my mom's parents both passed away when I was sort of like in college, within a few years of one another. And we don't get together, but I think if we were in the same city, we would get together and like have dinner on their respective birthdays. Because in part, because to kind of continue that sense of like, well, when you're at a funeral, you're suddenly, as we've talked about, like surrounded by all your people and like get to see. And so using that as like a mini catalyst to get everybody together. I feel like at the same time, we didn't grow up religious, and my mom went to Catholic school. My dad was like sort of Greek Orthodox, but doesn't speak Greek, so didn't like understand what they were saying at church and things like that. So it makes it complicated. But because of that, I feel very much like we're just floating along, figuring it out, because there isn't sort of this like set rituals that we're supposed to follow in our family in particular. So I feel inclined to take mourning as like, yeah, just time for reflection, and like continue to lean into my priorities if I've gotten out of whack. And yeah, I almost feel like I wish I had more of a ritual or something I could say, like, this is the thing, this feels really good in the moment, but like, I don't know if that actually exists or not so much.
I mean, a part of me is compelled because I always wanted, my dad, I think I've mentioned to you, I have like a couple, and I wish I recorded more of these, but I have a couple like hour-long conversations I had with him that I recorded, but I don't watch them because they're too tough, right? And maybe I've watched like 10 minutes of one or something like that. But in one of them, he talks about how he wanted to write his memoir, and he never got to write his memoir, you know. And I have this idea that comes to me from time to time, and maybe it's that whole Elizabeth Gilbert thing of like genius visits you, and you either birth it or it moves on, and but it keeps coming up for me where I'm like, you got to document the people that knew him. You got to record them. And if COVID wasn't going on, I think a part of me would be like, I'm going to fly to New York, interview a bunch of people. I'm going to fly to Canada, interview a bunch of people. I'm going to go to St. Vincent. Like I would strongly be interested in doing that and like devoting like 2 months to it. But being that I can't do that, like, should I still reach out to them? You know, should I still be like, hey, set up a camera? And because the crazy thing about it is like, they're passing away too. And with that, also their memory of them of him goes away, and by me recording them, I also hold on to them. So there's this thing that, you know, am I doing it out of selfishness of like I need to connect, or, you know, I don't know if it's right or wrong or good or bad, or if I should do it or shouldn't, but yeah, it keeps coming up.
I don't want to should or should not you, but at the same time, like what you're saying, it feels very along the lines of like Coco, and like that tradition for people, really, Dia de los Muertos, where it's like about remembering people, and like for people of Filipino descent, like the picnics, where you're just like it's about remembering and paying tribute to, and that's kind of like the other side of like, I mean, maybe it's not the other side of mourning, but it's like the other part of it is like the remembering them part. And I think that that's really great because it's a legacy feels like such a heavy, like pedestal word kind of. I'm like, oh, like legacy, I'm not trying to leave a legacy, but like it's just like what happens after, right?
Mhm.
And that from like what the people that your dad worked with, and like you, Jeff, and stuff like that, that's like legacy. And it is kind of like for you, but it's kind of for them, and it's also just knowledge and information. Like we read history books all the time about whatever people decided to write about, so like why not write about whoever you want? I think that that's the remembering part is like a really important thing. And I think for me, like since I'm maybe it's important to say, I think Julia, you touched on this, like I also did not really grow up specifically spiritual in any way, and so there wasn't like a this is the thing that happens. And even culturally, there were like there are certain like festivals where kind of like for Filipino people, there are Chinese customs that we didn't do super actively, but I was like aware of. We're like, oh, like we're supposed to go visit the great grandparents cemetery site around this time each year, and I'm not fully sure what's happening because I also didn't speak what was happening. But as a non-religious adult, sometimes it's just the like remembering like the good stuff kind of whenever it happens. You're like, oh man, this reminds me of that time, just in passing. Or there is we as a tangent, both of my parents were cremated as a
Yeah,
past tense, were cremated. And my sister and I scattered ashes in Hawaii, because we didn't go like all the time, but we went there as like a family vacation a handful of times. And like my mom really liked the beach, and like we had gone when it was just like my dad and me and my sister, and so we scattered ashes in like the same bay. And so sometimes it's kind of like a nice, I think Jeff, you mentioned this at one point too, where it's kind of like a nice thing because it's like our Mecca or whatever trip is like Hawaii. So it's like kind of a nice thing. But then like when we're there, we're like, oh, like let's go to that bay and like put a lei or some like flowers in the ocean, and like have a moment and just like actively think about them. But it doesn't, that can't happen. I can't do that every year all the time. But it is like a nice thing that gets to happen that's a little bit more planned. But it's, yeah, it's kind of, it's like a opportunity to remember people. And whether it's a place or a memory or a active thing you create for yourself or others, because I know that it can seem selfish, but it's also like other people want to remember that person. Like you're not the only person who knew them. Like other people want to remember them too. And it gives them kind of an opportunity or an excuse. Like if you're like, I made this video, and they're like, oh, let me watch this video. That's really nice.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Jeff, when you're talking about documenting things, it's like your version of, yeah, like remembering. And so that process, in that process, you're not insisting that everybody else goes out and records everything, but it is this kind of reminder to the rest of us also to find our own route for, like, yeah, remembering and honoring people, and really not waiting too long, because so often we hear like the regrets of the dying are, I never asked my mom what her favorite food was when she was a kid, or something like that, just the little things. So yeah, I think having awareness in whatever process, and you love to record conversations, like that's your route. That makes so much sense to me. And it doesn't really matter if there's like an outcome or a goal beyond just the creation of it. Like you'll see where it takes you.
I mean, this may sound weird, but I mean, I think a part of the reason why I like recording stuff, you know, and then hopping on a bunch of podcasts is because I myself like feel like, I don't know if I'm going to be around. I don't know if I'm going to be around in a year. Like, what type of impact do I want to make like today? And if I could share some story that has some impact with someone on some random person's podcast that 3 people listen to, you know, that might make a difference, right, in someone's life, you know, long after I'm gone, right? And I think of that for, you know, my dad, and like what impact he probably had, and me gathering more stories of him, not only may celebrate who he is, but also remind other people of like, oh, you know, there's something magical, not just about my dad, but maybe something magical about me, right? And I don't know, maybe I'm the only one that feels this, but like each time I hear COVID deaths, like it's soul crushing to me. Like it just doesn't even, you know, America has 10.5 infections, 244,000 people have died. How is that not like in 1 year, separate from all the other deaths that usually happen, you know? How is that not having a ripple effect that it's affecting the entire country, right? Or the entire world? You know, when you I just heard this on NPR like an hour ago, where, you know, nurses are going through compassion fatigue, which is similar to PTSD, because they just don't have enough, they don't have any more, they don't have any more compassion or energy or empathy, because here comes another person that they have to take care of. And it's to the point that they're nurses, and when someone, I guess, codes, meaning like they go into arrest, before they can run in to stop it, they have to put their stuff on, their PPE stuff. So that person might die as they're putting their stuff on. And then they have to cope with that. Like, it's just, I don't know, it just blows my mind as to where we currently are, and how I don't know if we fully embraced what is actually happening every day here.
Yeah, I don't think we have. I mean, I think a big part of it is like people don't even want to tune into a casual conversation about death, much less like opening up the reality of so many people dying. And then also, you know, because that onion always just comes back to like your own mortality. Everything always just dials back to that. And I think that's a huge part of why people are so like listless and restless, because they're just trying to stay busy enough
Yep.
to ignore it, but
Yep.
they're not it's like when you're depressed and you can't do anything, but you want to do all the things so you're
Yeah.
not in it. So push and pull.
That's very real. I feel like the thing that, as both of you were sharing those things, the thing that made me, the thing that I kind of got to, or that was like hovering, and it's not a full thought yet, but it's like it brings bringing humanity back to death.
Yeah.
Because, but it also, it's hard because it's, to a lot of people it's like scary, or the mortality and that thing, but like, not to be like death is happy. It doesn't have to be that, but it's just like, is there a more positive spin or version or something, or at least a way of like framing it, right? Because like the sort of like snippets that I can think of is, yeah, like it's terrible, like the fact that some people are having to like die by themselves without family, specifically now, like that sucks. But kind of like at funerals, it's like, it is sad, but like many people it's hard to like make sure that other people do this, but like they don't want to have like a sad funeral. They're like, oh, I want it to be a celebration of life. I want you to like think about the good memories. And so can we think about like, oh, like all this good these people did, like it's really a bummer that they don't get to do more, but like look at all this great stuff, be inspired by these things. And even like Jeff, with your dad's thing, or anybody's family or otherwise, like who's to say that someone in any point in time is not an important part of history? It's just, history is like whoever we know about or are taught about. And I hated history in school, but what made history interesting eventually was the stories. And it's not about like they were the general of this war, battle, one place. Like, I don't retain that. Like, oh, like here's this like one person who did this really cool thing and affected like these 100 people in their community, and all of those people did other stuff, but like that's like a very pivotal, like I can connect emotionally to like that person, like caring so much to do something. And I think it's the like the baby foundation points of the pyramid of like, we're living through history right now, always actually, but especially right now, and all like the little, everyone's stories matter.
Yeah.
It's just who's get told or not, or unfortunately some are cut short, but like that doesn't mean that they didn't have a voice or can't have a voice afterwards. And like maybe it's up to, not specifically us, but like people to uplift that part, which is sometimes hard because you're going through a lot of feelings at those times, but then being able to do the positive output after.
Yeah, this popped up when you said that, of like what impact do people have after they've passed away. I think of I don't know, Monet. Have you ever been to Amsterdam? There's a whole museum devoted to Monet, and that dude died alone and never knowing that he was a good artist. Like that just happened. Like, and he never was able to see it. And I think, I don't know if it was some nerdy, what Doctor Who. It was some Doctor Who where Monet comes back. I look at like Laura's like, what, you call it a nerdy? Yes, it's very nerdy, and also it's great. But in that show, they show Monet come back and actually visit his museum, and he's like in tears because he sees a museum of his stuff that he had like sitting in the freaking corner, that he didn't care about. And there's hundreds of people that are celebrating him. And it's like, man, oh, like that just gets me like there. Like if everyone could be celebrated that way. And, I recently got into like I guess argument with my girlfriend because I was so frustrated because we were talking about something that was like really small, or I thought it was small, or maybe it wasn't small, but I was like, man, I don't ever want you to experience what death's like. But if you did, you wouldn't sweat some of this stuff. You just wouldn't sweat some of this stuff. And I don't want that for you, but like also like that is part of the, thing that this is all amorphous. This all can just go away at any moment. And I
like
don't think
super the it's like
wait,
the blessing and the curse of the fleeting.
yeah, yeah. But there's something that
Imbalance.
I do believe that because of my dad, if there's one thing he taught me many things, but if one thing he taught me with his death is it's like, how do you want to show up today? Because you have that. You have like the next hour or the next minute. That's it. That's all that potentially is guaranteed to you. And it's not even guaranteed to you, right? So, uh, it goes back to the website I said earlier with the see your folks. That's what it's called, seeyourfolks.com, where if you knew you're only going to see your parents or your grandparents or your loved ones 5 more times, would your behavior change? And if so, why?
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes up a lot for people after a death, because then they think back on, you're all part of the mourning is like reconciling all the times that you maybe would have done something different, and thinking about how you can be different, how you can act different then in the future, and then reconciling that you can't act differently with that person, but with other people it still matters. And yeah, all of the layers of that realization. Yeah.
This is kind of off a tangent, but if you can follow me for a moment, I've been researching the 8-hour workday,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And I'm fascinated with what I have found that apparently 8-hour workday was invented in, I think, 1814 by a Welsh labor activist called, like, I think Jim Cone or something. And it was like 8 hours of leisure, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, right? But no one cared what he had to say, right? For 100 years, no one paid attention. They were like, that's stupid. And then I guess a lot of businesses realized that they were running people into the ground, literally killing them at work with 11 to 15-hour work days. That Henry Ford in 1917 instituted the 8-hour workday for his Ford plant. And then he doubled the salaries of all his staff and everyone's productivities went up, right? Like, it was like, oh my gosh, look at this. And he was like disrupting and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, the only reason I bring it up is nothing has changed in over 100 years. And they found that humans can only focus and do actual good work. The average person actually does 2 hours and 53 minutes of work in a given day. The rest of the time, they just kind of mess around or go to meetings or make up work or whatever. They busy themselves with all this stuff. And it just blows my mind when I go back to death, because I'm like, that's 5.5 hours. It's 8.8 hours that most people are working, at least in the US. That's 5.5 extra hours that no one is doing anything every day for 365 days, or maybe 300 days, whatever, and then you add that up and it's like, that's all this wasted time. Time you can spend it with your family, time that you can spend pursuing what you love, time looking for your loved ones, time, mourning or reflecting. And instead, what are we doing? It just seems so backwards to me.
This is like a constant topic in my life. I go on like major soapboxes about my, like, maybe we could start with a 6-hour workday, 4 days a week. So you can still get some meetings in, but you really just have a little time to do deep work. And then, like, let's all just start there and then see where it takes us. Because I don't know, when you don't have enough time to, like, cook for yourself or learn how to cook for yourself, or it's just like, oh, none of us stop to take care of ourselves. And then all of a sudden, younger people are like dropping like flies. And it's like,
Right.
Guys, we could do this differently. I actually, in meditation, there's a sort of saying, mindset around how you can't get more time in your life by meditating, but the quality of attention that you can bring to your life is like double the amount of time.
Absolutely. I totally believe that.
Sold.
And it frustrates me so much because one of the biggest regrets of the dying is I work too much.
Always, because it doesn't actually mean anything. Even if you're helping other people do amazing things, it still doesn't totally make you feel like your existence made a difference, like that someone else couldn't have replaced you in that position to do that job. Like you're not just like spouting out your own gifts to people.
Oh Lord, what is that pensive look?
There's bleh. Okay, so like we've tangented, but I'm not mad at this. So if there is like if there's one I hate those things are like what the one thing that's whatever. But like if you had to choose like a hand like two like 1 to 3 top 3 things that I know we can't change infrastructure, but like if you were capable for like yourself or whatever, like what are the like top things that we could change or should change or whatever that would like adjust our existence or like eventual like dying time of like I don't regret everything that I've done. Like what are the things that you could change?
Are you talking about humanity or are you talking about us?
I mean, like, let's start at home, right? I mean, like, I don't know what humanity is, but it's like, if it is, because if one of the things is just like, is there a way? It's hard because it's the cycle of like, well, I need to work so I can make money to survive. But if there's a way that we could work less or work differently to like fulfill the rest of ourselves better, like, is that like a worthwhile, like, that's like a huge thing that like maybe we should focus on. And like, not in a TED Talk way, but like in a, like, what are opinions, because there's the one that I feel like I always hear, which is not necessarily for better feelings later in life, but just the sleep, like I don't think I sleep enough, and apparently that is a huge helpful thing. But if it is like the people, it's like when there's the people who either are getting older and closer to death and are like, I wish I did this, or I never got to travel, or I never got to whatever. Or the people, and like on the flip side, I guess, the people who are like, Betty here has lived to be 105 and they're interviewing her on the news and she is like, I drink bourbon every day. And you're like, okay. Yeah. Like what are our, like, are there things that would help us have happier end of lifetimes? Like I don't there's not like an official answer, but like what are the categories or things to consider? Like one of them being like, can we find ways to work less? Because so many people, me included, don't take advantage of vacation.
Yeah.
Like it's there and you're supposed to take it. You're allowed to take it, but you like don't.
Well, here, I'll answer it this way. First, here, because I'm looking at the top regrets of the dying, the top 5 regrets of the dying, right? And I wish I hadn't worked so hard is one. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Woo! That's a big one.
Heavy.
That's a heavy one. That's a heavy one. I talk about that one a lot. Another one. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And 5th is I wish I had let myself be happier.
It makes me so sad.
You know, and it's and I guess the way I would answer it is, or I was answering it today on an interview, is someone was asking me, well, what should we be doing differently? And I was thinking, well, usually our answer, and at least in America, is always do more. Oh, my business is not doing well. Well, then you got to do more calls. Oh, I'm, well, I'm not healthy. Well, more exercise, more. And it's like, I think we got to do less. I think this celebrating of less stuff, less things, less, like I think of siestas in Spain or even in the Philippines. My family, the kids, when they were going to school, would go home for lunch. Like was just less work. And we have found ourselves busying ourselves so much, ironically enough, to find importance. And instead, we are finding ourselves all feeling insignificant.
Yeah. I mean, all of that reminds me of like why I'm obsessed with intentional living. Because for me, it's about, I used to work 80 hours a week, and I would almost fall asleep at work in the middle of the day because I wasn't getting enough sleep, and I was definitely not eating well. Not even like, anyway, I won't go on that tangent, but after getting cancer, it was like, okay, so if the food I eat is not supporting my body, then like, what's the point? But I don't have enough time. So I need to make the time to cook for myself, because I need to learn, like I had to relearn or just learn for the first time how to listen to like what I actually need over the voice that's telling me like, you should eat pizza and like donuts and like comfort food, getting down to the level of like, I'm tired right now. Maybe I should take a nap instead of drinking some caffeine. I'm tired right now. Maybe I'm not hungry. Maybe I just should take a nap. And just like really learning how to tune in, because I've been a like pretty diehard nonconformist my whole life, even though I've had my phases of like Lacoste polos and pearl necklaces and stuff. But like, for the most part, I'm always just like, fuck everybody. Like, I'm going to do my own thing. And in that, I think there's so much freedom, because if you don't give a shit what other people think of you, that helps a lot. Easier said than done. But I think a big part of that is people are afraid of discovering who they are, because we're not taught that. But it's like, guys, you're magical. I'm sorry, but whatever you find deep inside of you is not going to be scary. I don't think you're repressing your serial killer tendencies. I don't think that's how that works. Like, just being so jazzed about yourself helps. Like, I just think everybody's awesome. I know I say that a lot, and people are like, we're not snowflakes. I'm like, we're so awesome though. Okay, like, get out of my face. You're like a living human being. That's amazing. So like, let's figure out what you like to do. Like, why not? And through that lens, like, everyone's amazing. There are people that disagree with me on stuff that I think have the potential to have an amazing impact in the realm that they live in. And they probably, like, we don't need to pretend to influence one another, because we have our own spheres of influence that we live in. And like, it doesn't make them less awesome. And so, yeah, I think just like a lot of that, I always say, if I ran for president, my platform would be mental health, emotional intelligence, and like an emphasis on education, but like in a less structured overachiever perfectionist kind of way.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'll just say this one thing. What resonates with me about you saying, oh, well, everyone is awesome, is like, I think of, the idea of like, well, is each of our lives a miracle, right? And I've heard this numerous times, but the likelihood that you're going to be born is like 1 in 400 trillion. Like, that's the probability that everything works out for you. So in many ways, it's pretty amazing. It's utterly ridiculous. It is a miracle that you are here, but we don't act that way.
No.
Totally. I feel like I don't know the actual math, and I can't do backwards numbers, but it's some of the things, like it's kind of like the reverse family tree, right? So like, for you to exist, there was like your parents and their parents and their parents and theirs, and like, it takes like 200 something whatever 100 years ago, for like whatever, hundreds of years ago, several generations, for you to be here. And you're like, oh my God, like, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And I'd love to treat it more like that.
Think
It's
about
hard sometimes.
representing everyone before you.
Yeah. Well, Fun fact, I have an identical twin, so like we're even more, you know, like if you, in case your odds were small enough anyway. So but like, I lost my train of thought, but I had a good point to make. Oh, I was thinking about how it can feel like a lot of pressure to be like the ancestor of all these people, and you're trying to like uphold this and make an impact on the world. And so I think a really important part of like intentional living is just being like, okay, let me tune into what I care about. And if I care about other people, which I do, I want to ensure that my actions are positively impacting other people. So
Right.
the scale of impact can be much, much smaller. Like amazing if you want to affect change in the whole world, like awesome. But like if you had one person where you made their day, or like, you know, just like it can be simple. And as my final thought in this string of thoughts, before Jeff, you were saying something and I really wanted to just be like, I just strive for celebrating and normalizing simplicity.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
we,
Can we not keep celebrating just, all this people that are accomplished, right? Quote unquote accomplished, and just celebrate people for just being? Because I think we misinterpret what the meaning of legacy is, right? We think that, oh, all these people are behind me, so I need to do something impressive, like get on Forbes 40 under 40 or something. They don't care about that. They're dead. They're dead. They just want, I mean, if I were to die, I would wish upon my nephews, I would just want them to be happy and to appreciate their life. That's it. That's it.
Ugh.
Just enjoy you being alive, however you want to interpret that. There's no rules, just strive for that. Strive to figure out who you are and enjoy that. And impact other people however you want to impact other people. That's, I think, what most of the dying would want for us, right? To enjoy the playground while we're at the playground.
I think there's something that I feel like almost, I'm gonna misquote this, but that like it ties to both of those things for me that I saw recently. Like, it's like everybody's talking about the same thing, and it feels really important. I saw there's like a post that's been floating around, and I hope it's correct. But it's like I don't know if it's like a gravestone or like a monument or something like that, but it's like some woman's name, and she was like enslaved person, or like she came somewhere and like she did this and had these kids and whatever and blah 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 blah, and she'd be so proud of her daughter, and it was like Michelle Obama was like how far she's come. And it is just one of those things, like you just have to be and do good around you and enjoy yourself, and like things will happen eventually. Like it doesn't have to be all up to you, but it is like enjoy your life because it's all we've got, and then don't be sad at the end of it. And then if you do that, then like your people will also hopefully enjoy themselves, not be sad at the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
um I mean, I had a thought of something, just because I don't know if we wanted to round this out
Right,
a
we
little
have
bit,
to
but
wrap it up.
in the idea of this came to me, and I don't know if it's a good one because I've thought about it, but I don't know if I've given you a chance to think about it. But in the idea of like mourning or tradition or like celebrating people past, anyone, I mean, if you've had someone that's close to you or meant a good amount of deal to your life, that in like almost like a passing down to others who don't know that person, is there like a something that you learned or a saying from somebody who is no longer around that you hold dear to, that is maybe something that you would want to share with this small community of people? If you want to think about it for a second, we can have a moment of reflection. And I can also go first if that's helpful, because like this has been floating in my head for a while.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So like mine is I've said this on often, I feel like lately, but the like word of wisdom, or something that I feel like I didn't realize that I had growing up, and then I as I became a young adult, recognized that it was like a catchphrase of my dad's, if you will. But it's it is what it is. But it was never a like give up version of the mantra. It was just like a now what. And I think that it kind of has shaped me, and I feel like I'm not trying to like put it on everyone else, but I feel like it's really relevant sometimes, where you're just like, you can't change that thing. That's done now. It is what it is. So now what do you want to do about it? Like, how can you fix it? How can we move forward? And it's like a hopeful version of it is what it is. And I enjoy it. It's like, it was so much so that like my sister and I, there were t-shirts in Hawaii that we found that said, it is what it is. We're like, oh my God, we're buying these. We bought, like, I think we had gone for some other reason, but like he was still around at the time. Like we bought one for him, and he like wore it. We're like, this is so perfect. But that I hold in, I think like in my core, it's real. And I feel like it's a helpful thing that is from my past people that I can share with other people. Do you all have anything that you might want to share?
That's beautiful and very zen. Radical acceptance. A specific phrase isn't coming up for me, but in 2016, one of my organizing clients, it was like a couple, and the man had just turned 50 and he died of a heart attack. And it was just like, the like just a few years from retirement and doing all these things, and just like full of a lot of those same regrets. And so when I was just there to kind of witness this, like from the inside of the family, but I'm not family, experience of just like, yeah, that immediate aftermath of like reality, puncture point, and then kind of what happens after and how that shifts your priorities. And so I just constantly tell people, like, over workers, because he worked a ton and he loved his job, but he also spent a majority of his life at work. And so there's a fine line between, even if you love your work, it doesn't mean that should be the thing that takes up the most time in your life. Like, yeah. So that was really that's not a phrase, but I think just because you love it doesn't mean that it's the right to do or be the biggest thing. So yeah, I feel like that's
for me
really important.
Two that come up. There's Nadia Medina, who was my academic counselor at Tufts University. And she didn't have a phrase, but I think of whenever I would work with her, and I always felt like she chose compassion over judgment. And that was a great feeling, because like, I was a mess. I didn't know what I was doing. I was getting bad grades, and regardless, she always came with compassion instead of judgment, which really created a safe space for me to express myself. And that was really powerful. That's one of the biggest takeaways I got from her. And then from my dad would always say, there's a time and a place for everything. And this is neither the time nor the place. And whenever I think of that phrase, I do the opposite. It's like my goal to be like, no, play can be in this place. I am going to prove play can be here right now, in this funeral, in this awkward meeting, in this, like, I constantly just want to do that, which doesn't make sense, because you're like, well, you're supposed to follow the phrase, but I'm like, nope, I'm doing the exact opposite.
I think it doesn't have to be like a live by, but it can be like I am inspired by this in some way.
I am inspired to prove that is not the case. Okay.
Can I share one last thing just because
So there we
it
go.
felt, okay, this was not me, but I do feel like it's kind of relevant to like what we were talking about here. And it was like some post I saw somewhere on the internet, but I know people like this and it made me like think like, oh gosh. But somebody was talking, I don't know if I've talked about it here, but someone was talking about how somebody, I don't know if it was their mom or an aunt or somebody passed away, and they were like looking for photos for the like a memorial service or something like that, and they like could not find you because that person didn't want to be photographed.
Yeah.
And it's like they found like one, but it was like kind of like a side profile, like it wasn't like a terrible picture, but it wasn't like a great picture. And even if it's one of those things of like, even if you don't love photos, like allow yourself to be photographed sometimes so that people can like remember you, and like people who care about you like have something to like look and be like, oh, like look at this beautiful human. Because once you're gone, you can't. And that when I think like Julia, I think when you were just talking about that too with the guy, and you're just like, oh, like it made me think of that. And I was like, man, I've been that person where I was like, oh, I'm like, no, I don't want to. But I'm trying to be more okay with it.
Oh, so this was a lovely conversation. Like always, I love these conversations.
Covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
So just so people know, how can they find out more about both of you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram spouting out ideas about stuff at life.coach.julia, and also on my website at julia.coach.
And I'm currently on like LinkedIn and some other places, and there is a website in the works. Come later, but it's gonna cultivatorofcuriosity.com soon.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for listening. This is Jeff with Rediscover Your Play. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.